Progressive leader Therion stepped forward, his light patterns bright with enthusiasm. Consider the implications beyond our own world. If humans can catalyze evolution in Velthari, what might they accomplish with other species? We could be witnessing the birth of a new form of galactic civilization. The council chamber buzzed with excited discussion as the Velthari began to grasp the full scope of what had been achieved. This wasn't just about their princess and a human ambassador. It was about redefining how different species could interact and grow together. Dr. So Young continued her presentation. Our research suggests that humans possess a unique bioelectric signature that can interface with a wide variety of alien neural systems. Each species would likely produce different results, different forms of hybrid consciousness. The possibilities are literally endless. Taemin felt a surge of emotion, his own human wonder enhanced by Nalthira's crystalline perception of infinite mathematical possibilities. We've proven that contact between species doesn't have to result in conflict or domination. Instead, it can lead to transformation that benefits everyone involved. Nalthira added, the integration process has also revealed new technologies that neither species could have developed alone. We can now perceive energy patterns that were invisible to both human and Velthari senses. We can solve complex problems by thinking in ways that transcend the limitations of single-species consciousness. As, if to demonstrate their point, both beings raised their hands simultaneously. Nalthira's crystalline ability to manipulate energy fields combined with Taemin's human intuition created a display of light that danced through the air in patterns too complex for either species to have imagined alone. The Velthari watched, in awe as the light show told the story of their shared future, a galaxy where humans served not as conquerors, but as partners in evolution, helping other species unlock potentials they never knew they possessed. Elder Velthano, oldest of the council members, spoke with a voice that carried the weight of millennia. Perhaps it is time for our people to look beyond our crystal towers and consider what other wonders await us among the stars. If humans can help us evolve, what might we accomplish together as we encounter new forms of life? The session ended with a unanimous vote to establish a new diplomatic corps, teams of integrated human-Velthari pairs who would serve as ambassadors to other worlds. It was the beginning of an era where humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy would not be technology or military might, but the ability to help other civilizations become more than they had ever dreamed possible. Taemin and Nalthira had become the first of a new kind of being, proving that sometimes the most profound victories came not from conquest, but from connection. Are you sure about this? So Young asked quietly. Taemin looked toward Nalthira's quarters, where her failing light patterns were barely visible through the walls. No, he admitted, but I'm sure that walking away would be worse than whatever happens next. Dr. So Young worked frantically in her makeshift laboratory, surrounded by both human technology and ancient Velthari crystal formations. She had spent the last 18 hours studying the old texts scholar Thylanos had provided, trying to understand the integration process described in symbols that were thousands of years old. According to these writings, she explained to Taemin, and Princess Nalthira, the successful pairs didn't just touch randomly. They used specific crystal formations to channel and regulate the bioelectric exchange. Think of it like using a transformer to step down electrical voltage. Without it, the power surge would destroy the circuit. Nalthira lay on a bed of interconnected crystals that So Young had arranged according to the ancient diagrams. The princess's condition had worsened dramatically overnight. The stress fractures in her skin now covered most of her body, creating a web of hairline cracks that made her look like a broken mirror held together by willpower alone. The pain is getting worse, Nalthira whispered, her voice barely audible. I can feel my matrix trying to hold together, but the competing energy patterns are tearing me apart from the inside. Taemin knelt beside the crystal bed, his hands hovering inches from her fractured skin. Are you certain this will work? The texts are thousands of years old. What if we're misunderstanding something crucial? So Young checked her instruments one final time. The bioelectric readings match what the ancient descriptions suggest should happen. But you're right. We're essentially performing experimental surgery based on archaeological evidence. The margin for error is enormous. She had positioned smaller crystals around Taimin's designated spot, creating a geometric pattern that supposedly would allow human chaotic energy to blend gradually with Velthari ordered patterns. The setup looked more like an art installation than a medical procedure. "If this doesn't work," Nalthira said softly, "promise me you'll tell my people that I chose this path willingly. I don't want them to blame humanity for my death." "You're not going to die," Taimin said firmly, though he wasn't sure if he was trying to convince her or himself. So Young activated her monitoring equipment. "Okay, we're going to start with minimal contact and gradually increase the connection. Ambassador, place your hand on the primary crystal formation. Princess, when you're ready, make contact through the secondary matrix." Taimin pressed his palm against the cool crystal surface. Immediately, he felt a tingling sensation as the formation began to glow with soft blue light. The crystal seemed to be analyzing his bioelectric patterns, learning the chaotic rhythms of human neural activity. Nalthira reached out with a trembling hand, touching her assigned crystal. The moment her skin made contact, the entire formation exploded into brilliant light. But this time, instead of the harsh, overwhelming energy of their previous contacts, the crystals created a gentle bridge between their different biological systems. Taimin gasped as alien thoughts began filtering into his consciousness. But, rather than the confusing jumble he'd experienced before, Nalthira's mental patterns felt organized, structured, beautiful in their mathematical precision. He could sense her thoughts forming in perfect crystalline logic, each idea connecting to the next in elegant sequences that human minds rarely achieved. For Nalthira, the experience was equally transformative. Human emotions flooded through her consciousness, not the gentle harmonics of Velthari feeling, but raw, chaotic, wonderfully unpredictable surges of joy, fear, hope, and determination. She felt Taimin's memories cascading through her mind, childhood moments on Earth, the excitement of his first space mission, his terror and fascination when he'd first seen her world. "It's working," So Young breathed, watching her instruments. "Both of your neural patterns are stabilizing, but they're not becoming identical. You're maintaining your individual characteristics while gaining access to each other's cognitive abilities." The integration continued for hours. Taimin found himself thinking with a clarity he'd never experienced, seeing connections between ideas that had always eluded him. Complex problems that would have taken him days to solve now seemed obvious, their solutions appearing in his mind like mathematical equations writing themselves. Nalthira was experiencing her own transformation. The rigid thought patterns that had defined Velthari consciousness for millennia were becoming fluid, adaptable. She could feel creativity blooming in her mind, the ability to imagine things that had never existed, to leap between unrelated concepts and discover new possibilities. "The stress fractures are healing," So Young reported with amazement. "Princess, your crystalline matrix is actually becoming stronger, not weaker. The integration process is reinforcing your structure instead of destroying it." As the sun set over Velthara, casting rainbow patterns through the crystal chamber, both beings began to understand what they were becoming. They were still recognizably themselves. Taimin remained human, Nalthira remained Velthari, but they now carried aspects of each other's consciousness within their own minds. "I can feel the universe differently now," Nalthira said wonderingly, her voice carrying new harmonics that blended human emotional depth with crystalline musical tones. "I understand why humans explore, why you reach for things beyond your grasp. The wanting itself is beautiful." Taimin nodded, his thoughts flowing with unprecedented clarity. "And I understand why your people value harmony and precision. There's a peace in ordered thinking that humans rarely achieve. We've been missing something fundamental." So Young smiled as she reviewed the final readings. "You've both gained capabilities that neither species possessed alone. This isn't just successful integration, it's the birth of something entirely new." The transformation was complete, but neither Taimin nor Nalthira fully understood yet what they had become, or what their success might mean for the future of both their species. 3 months after the integration, Princess Nalthira stood before the Velthari High Council once again, but this time she was not alone. Taemin stood beside her, and their shared presence created something that had never existed in the crystalline amphitheater before, a perfect harmony between order and chaos, structure and creativity. The changes in both beings were immediately visible. Nalthira's crystalline skin now showed flowing patterns that moved like living art, shifting between the geometric precision of traditional Velthari design and the organic, unpredictable swirls that reflected her human-influenced thoughts. Taemin appeared more composed than any human the Velthari had ever seen, his movements carrying a grace and purposefulness that spoke of crystalline clarity merged with human determination. Dr. So Young presented her findings to the assembled council, her voice filled with barely contained excitement. What we've documented goes far beyond simple biological adaptation. Princess Nalthira and Ambassador Taemin have achieved something that redefines our understanding of consciousness itself. She activated a holographic display that showed their brain activity patterns. Where once there had been two distinct neural signatures, human chaos and Velthari order, now there was something entirely new. The readings showed thought patterns that flowed seamlessly between structured logic and creative intuition, creating a form of intelligence that was greater than the sum of its parts. The princess can now process information with the speed and precision of advanced Velthari consciousness, while also accessing the creative problem-solving abilities that make humans such effective explorers and innovators, So Young explained. Meanwhile, Ambassador Taemin has gained the ability to think in the mathematical harmonies that define Velthari science, while retaining the emotional depth and adaptability that characterizes human consciousness. Elder Velkara, who had led the opposition to the integration, stepped forward. Her ancient crystalline features showed a mixture of fascination and concern. These changes are remarkable, but what do they mean for our species as a whole? Are you suggesting that all Velthari should undergo this transformation? Nalthira spoke, her voice now carrying harmonics that no pure Velthari could produce. Honored Elder, we are not advocating for universal change. What we've discovered is that evolution doesn't require everyone to be the same. Some Velthari may choose this path. Others may remain as they have always been. Diversity makes us stronger, not weaker. Taemin nodded, his thoughts flowing with the crystalline clarity he'd gained from their bond. The integration has shown us that humans may serve a unique role in galactic civilization. We're not meant to be conquerors or rulers. We're catalysts, beings whose chaotic nature can unlock evolutionary potential in other species. Scholar Thylanos, ancient keeper of the old texts, chimed his agreement. The prophecies spoke of energy bringers who would help worthy species transcend their limitations, but the texts never suggested this was about dominance. It was always about mutual growth, shared evolution. Chaos, Nalthira replied with a weak smile. We Velthari are creatures of order and harmony. Our thoughts flow in predictable patterns. Our emotions resonate at stable frequencies. We've achieved perfect crystalline harmony, but perfection is also limitation. She gestured toward Taemin. Humans are chaos incarnate. Your thoughts jump randomly between ideas. Your emotions shift without warning. Your bioelectric fields pulse in patterns that make no sense to us. But that chaos is exactly what our species needs to break through the barriers of our own perfection. Taemin felt a chill as he began to understand. You're saying this attraction you feel isn't personal at all, it's biological programming. Deeper than that, Nalthira said, her light patterns growing brighter as she spoke. It's evolutionary destiny. My ancestors were selected for this moment, bred over generations to be capable of bonding with chaotic energy beings like yourself. I'm not choosing to undergo this transformation. I'm fulfilling the purpose my bloodline was designed for. So Young was frantically taking notes, but her expression showed growing alarm. Princess, that's fascinating from a scientific perspective, but it doesn't change the fact that your body is tearing itself apart. The stress fractures in your crystalline matrix are spreading. At this rate, you have maybe days before the damage becomes irreversible. Then we have days to complete the process, Nalthira said with determination that surprised both humans. The ancient texts speak of a final integration phase, where the energy bringer and the chosen Velthari form a permanent neural link. It's dangerous. Many attempts resulted in death for both participants, but it's the only way to stabilize the transformation. Taemin stood up abruptly, pacing away from the bed. You're talking about some kind of permanent connection between us? What would that mean? Would we still be ourselves, or would we become something else entirely? I don't know, Nalthira admitted, her honesty more frightening than any lie could have been. The text described the successful pairs as being more than the sum of their parts. They gained abilities that neither species possessed alone: enhanced intelligence, expanded perception, the ability to think in ways that transcended the limitations of both human and Velthari consciousness. She paused, her breathing becoming more labored as another wave of fractures spread across her skin. But they also describe failures, beings who lost themselves in the integration process, becoming something that was neither human nor Velthari, but couldn't survive as either. So Young looked up from her scanner with grave concern. The neural feedback is increasing. Princess, we need to make a decision soon. Either we attempt this integration process you're describing, or we find a way to reverse the changes before they kill you. Can they be reversed? Taemin asked desperately. I don't know, So Young admitted. The transformation appears to be designed to be irreversible once it reaches a certain point. We may already be past that threshold. Nalthira closed her eyes, her entire body shimmering with competing patterns of light. The choice is no longer whether to proceed. The only choice left is whether to face what's coming together, or let me die alone while my body tears itself apart, trying to become something it was always meant to be. The emergency communication came through at 3 in the morning, Velthara. Time. Captain Park Ji-hoon's face appeared on the holographic display in Taemin's quarters, his expression grim even through the static-filled transmission from the orbiting Earth vessel. Ambassador, I've been monitoring the situation down there through Dr. Kim's reports, Captain Park said without preamble. What I'm hearing sounds like a diplomatic disaster waiting to happen. The Velthari Council is split. Their princess is dying and you're somehow at the center of it all. Taemin rubbed his tired eyes. He hadn't slept properly in days, and the constant stress was wearing him down. Captain, it's more complicated than that. We may be witnessing something unprecedented, the first successful contact between species that can actually evolve together. Or we may be watching an alien princess die from exposure to human biology, Captain Park countered sharply. Either way, I'm not willing to risk an interstellar incident. I'm ordering immediate evacuation of all Earth personnel. You can't be serious, Taemin protested, standing up from his chair. We're on the verge of a breakthrough that could change everything for both our species. If we leave now, Princess Nalthira dies, and we lose any chance of establishing meaningful relations with the Velthari. Captain Park's expression softened slightly, but his voice remained firm. Taemin, I understand your dedication to the mission, but I also understand the political realities. If that princess dies, while under the influence of human contact, Earth will be blamed. The Velthari could declare war, cut off all trade negotiations, or worse. I can't risk that for the sake of one person, even a royal one. Through the crystal walls of his quarters, Taemin could see the faint glow coming from Nalthira's chambers. Her light patterns had been growing more erratic each day, and Dr. So Young's latest reports painted an increasingly dire picture. What if she doesn't die? Taemin asked quietly. What if this transformation actually works? The ancient texts suggest that successful integration could benefit both species enormously. We could be looking at advances in technology, medicine, even space travel that neither of us could achieve alone. And what if it doesn't work? Captain Park shot back. What if you're both killed in the process? Then Earth loses its best xenobiologist and its most experienced ambassador, while the Velthari lose their heir to the throne. Nobody wins in that scenario. Taemin was quiet for a long moment, staring at his reflection in the dark crystal wall. He thought about his training, about the oath he'd taken to represent humanity's best interests. But he also thought about Nalthira's desperate eyes, about the way she'd spoken of glimpsing possibilities beyond anything either species had imagined. Captain, I'm requesting permission to stay and see this through. Request denied, Captain, Park said immediately. The transport leaves in 6 hours. Be on it, Ambassador. That's an order. Then I'm formally resigning my commission, Taemin said, the words coming out before he'd fully decided to say them. As of this moment, I'm no longer acting as an official representative of Earth. I'm acting as a private citizen who's chosen to remain on Velthara. Captain Park's face went red with anger. You can't be serious. You're throwing away your career, your future, everything you've worked for. And for what? An alien princess you've known for less than 2 weeks? For the chance to be part of something bigger than myself, Taemin replied, surprised by the certainty in his own voice. Captain, I've spent my entire adult life facilitating contact between species. I've helped negotiate trade agreements, cultural exchanges, territorial disputes. But this is different. This isn't just about diplomacy or economics. This is about evolution itself. The captain was quiet for a moment, studying Taemin's face through the holographic display. You realize I can't protect you once you're no longer under Earth's protection. If something goes wrong, you'll be on your own. I understand, Taemin said, but I also understand that some opportunities only come once in a lifetime, maybe once in the history of a species. I can't walk away from that. Dr. So Young appeared, in the doorway, her expression urgent. Ambassador, the princess is asking for you. Her condition is deteriorating rapidly. Captain Park heard the exchange and sighed heavily. Dr. Kim, you're still under my authority. I'm ordering you to return to the ship immediately. So Young looked back and forth between the two men, clearly torn. Captain, with respect, the princess needs medical monitoring during whatever process they're about to attempt. If I leave now, both of them could die. And if you stay, you could die with them, Captain Park pointed out. Then that's a risk I'm willing to take, So Young said firmly. I became a xenobiologist to study life forms that challenge our understanding of what's possible. This is exactly that kind of situation. Captain Park looked at both of them for a long moment, then shook, his head in frustration. You're both insane, but I can see I'm not going to change your minds. He paused, his expression softening slightly. For what it's worth, I hope you're right about this. I hope it's worth the risk you're taking. The transmission ended, leaving Taemin and So Young alone in the crystal chamber. Outside, the twin suns of Velthara were beginning to rise, casting long shadows across the alien landscape. Tylenus nodded solemnly. According to the ancient texts, the energy bringers were meant to help our species take the next step in our evolution. But the choice was always ours to make. The question now is whether our princess is ready for such a transformation, and whether you, Ambassador, are prepared for what it might mean for both of your species. So Young stared at her equipment, her scientific mind reeling with possibilities. They weren't just dealing with a diplomatic crisis anymore. They were potentially witnessing the birth of something that had never existed before, a hybrid consciousness that could bridge the gap between two completely different forms of life. The great crystal amphitheater had never witnessed such chaos. Hundreds of Velthari filled the curved seats, their combined light patterns creating a dizzying display of colors that pulsed with the rhythm of heated argument. At the center of it all sat the High Council, 12 ancient beings whose crystalline forms had grown so clear with age that they seemed like living glass sculptures. Taemin stood in the defendant's circle, feeling very small and very human among the towering crystal beings. Beside him, Princess Nalthira swayed slightly on her feet, the stress fractures in her skin now visible to everyone present. The new patterns of light that covered half her body pulsed weakly, like a dying heartbeat. Elder Velkara rose first, her massive form casting rainbow shadows across the amphitheater floor. She was the leader of the traditional faction, and her voice carried the authority of someone who had never been questioned in her 1,000-year lifetime. Members of the council, she began, her tone as cold as winter starlight. We face the greatest threat to our species' purity since the Chaos Wars. This human contamination spreads through our princess like a disease, changing her very essence into something unnatural and wrong. Murmurs of agreement rippled through parts of the crowd. Velkara pointed one crystalline finger at Nalthira, who flinched as if physically struck. Look at her. She no longer resembles the princess we have known and respected. These alien patterns in her skin are like scars, marking her as something That is no longer truly Velthari. How can we allow someone so compromised to inherit the crystal throne? The traditional faction's supporters began a rhythmic chiming that echoed through the chamber, their light patterns synchronized in shows of solidarity. But not everyone joined in. About half the assembly remained silent, their own patterns flickering with uncertainty. That's when Thyrion stood up. He was younger than Velkhara by several centuries, his crystalline skin still showing the bright clarity of middle age. As leader of the progressive faction, he had always advocated for change, but even his supporters seemed nervous about defending what they were witnessing. "Respected Velkhara speaks of contamination," Thyrion said, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "But scholar Thylanos has shown us ancient texts that speak of this moment as destiny, not disaster. For over a millennium, we have remained unchanged, static, limited by our own rigid thinking." He gestured toward Taemin, who tried not to fidget under the attention of hundreds of alien eyes. "These humans may be the key to unlocking potential we never knew we possessed. Princess Nalthira is not becoming contaminated. She is becoming evolved." Velkhara's light patterns flared bright red with anger. "Evolution? You call this chaotic destruction evolution? She can barely function. She has abandoned her royal duties, neglected her people, and obsesses over alien contact like some kind of addict. Is this the future you want for our species?" "What I want," Therion replied firmly, "is for us to stop being afraid of change. Our people have grown comfortable in our crystal towers, but comfort leads to stagnation. Perhaps the princess's experience, however difficult, is exactly what we need to grow beyond our current limitations." The crowd was becoming more agitated, with different factions chiming their support for either side. Some Velthari had begun to leave their seats, clustering together in groups that pulsed with synchronized light patterns. The division in their society was becoming physically visible. Elder Velthanor, the oldest member of the council, finally spoke. His voice was so quiet that the entire amphitheater fell silent to hear him. "We have heard arguments for tradition and for progress, but we have not heard from the beings most affected by this crisis." He turned toward the center of the chamber. "Princess Nalthira, you stand accused of endangering our species through your alien obsession. How do you answer?" Nalthira raised her head with visible effort. The light patterns in her skin were so chaotic now that looking at her too long made Taimin's eyes water. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that no pure Velthari had ever produced. "Honored Council," she began, swaying as she fought to remain standing, "I do not ask you to understand what I am experiencing. I barely understand it myself, but I know that when I touch the human ambassador, I glimpse possibilities that our people have never imagined. I see thoughts that think in ways we have never thought. I feel emotions that our language has no words for." She paused, her breathing labored. "If this makes me no longer purely Velthari, then perhaps it is time for our species to become something more than what we have always been." The chamber erupted into chaos. Supporters of both factions began chiming loudly, their combined sounds creating a cacophony that made the crystal walls ring like bells. Some Velthari were on their feet, gesturing angrily, while others sat in stunned silence. Velkhara's voice cut through the noise like a blade. "Then you choose contamination over purity? You would sacrifice everything our ancestors built for the sake of alien influence?" "I choose growth over stagnation," Nalthira replied, though the effort of speaking seemed to drain her remaining strength. "Even if it kills me." The words hung in the air like a death sentence, and Taimin realized that the princess might be speaking more literally than anyone in the chamber understood. After the chaotic council session, Princess Nalthira collapsed. In her private chambers, Dr. Kim So-young rushed to examine her, bringing portable scanners that revealed the terrifying truth about what was happening inside the princess's crystalline body. "Ambassador, you need to see this," So-young called. Urgently, as Taimin entered the room, the princess lay on her crystal bed, her skin flickering with irregular patterns of light that seemed to be fighting against each other. Where the human-influenced patterns met her natural Velthari glow, tiny fractures appeared and disappeared, like lightning in a storm. So-young held up her scanner, its screen showing a three-dimensional image of Nalthyra's internal structure. Her entire nervous system is rebuilding itself. Look at these neural pathways. They're trying to adapt to process human bioelectric frequencies, but the change is happening too fast. Taemin stared at the display in horror. He could see the princess's crystalline matrix developing stress points where the old and new patterns intersected. What does that mean for her? It means she's running out of time, So Young said grimly. Her body is trying to evolve, but evolution usually takes thousands of years. What's happening to her is like trying to compress a millennium of genetic change into a few weeks. If we can't find a way to stabilize the process, the internal pressure could shatter her completely. Nalthyra's eyes opened slowly, focusing on Taemin with visible effort. "I can hear you talking about me," she whispered, her voice carrying strange harmonics. "But it's not just your voices I hear anymore. I can sense your thoughts, Ambassador, your emotions, your fears." Taemin knelt beside her bed, careful not to make physical contact. "Princess, Dr. Kim says the changes in your body are dangerous. We need to find a way to slow them down." "No," Nalthyra said, struggling to sit up. "You don't understand. This isn't something that can be stopped or slowed. It's like trying to stop a river from flowing to the ocean. My body knows what it needs to become, even if my mind doesn't." She looked at her own hands, watching the competing light patterns pulse beneath her translucent skin. "I've been reading the ancient texts that scholar Tylanos found. The energy. Bringers didn't just touch our ancestors randomly. There was a pattern, a purpose. Our species was meant to evolve beyond what we are now, but we were missing a crucial component." "What component?" So Young asked, her scientific curiosity overriding her concern. "More," she whispered, her voice carrying harmonics that made the crystal structures around them resonate. "I need more." The next morning, Taemin was still trying to process what had happened when urgent chiming sounds woke him from his sleep. He rolled out of the crystalline bed in his guest quarters, rubbing his eyes as the musical tones grew more insistent. Through the transparent walls of his room, he could see several Velthari courtiers approaching at a rapid pace. Kylvan was among them, his usual composed demeanor replaced by obvious anxiety. The diplomat's light patterns flickered erratically as he spoke. "Ambassador, forgive the early intrusion, but we have a situation. Princess Nalthyra is demanding to see you immediately." Taemin frowned as he pulled on his clothes. "It's barely dawn. Surely whatever diplomatic matters she wants to discuss can wait until the scheduled meeting this afternoon." The Velthari exchanged glances that somehow managed to look worried despite their crystalline features. "I'm afraid the princess is not interested in standard diplomatic protocols anymore," Kylvan explained carefully. "She has been awake all night, pacing her chambers and speaking of nothing but her need to touch you again." When Taemin arrived at the throne room, he was shocked by what he saw. Princess Nalthyra sat on her crystal throne, but she looked nothing like the composed royal he had met yesterday. Her light patterns were chaotic and dim, pulsing irregularly like a dying star. Her crystalline skin, which had been flawlessly smooth, now showed stress fractures along the edges, where the new patterns of light from their contact still glowed faintly. "Human," she said, her voice carrying an edge of desperation that made Taemin uncomfortable. "Come closer, I require another diplomatic consultation." Taemin approached cautiously, noting how the other Velthari in the room seemed to shrink away from their princess. "Your Highness, are you feeling well? You look different today." Nalthyra laughed, but the sound was harsh and discordant compared to the musical tones typical of her species. "I feel everything and nothing at once. Yesterday, when we touched, I experienced sensations that my people have no words for. Now, without that contact, I feel hollow, empty, like part of my soul has been torn away." She stood from her throne, abruptly moving with jerky, uncontrolled motions. "Touch me again, Ambassador, now." The desperation in her voice was alarming. Taemin glanced around the room and saw fear in the eyes of every Velthari present. "Your Highness, perhaps we should consult with your medical advisors first. This reaction seems unusual." "I don't want medical advisors," Nalthyra snapped, her light patterns flaring bright red. "I want your touch. I need it more than I need air or food or sleep." Before Taemin could respond, She had crossed the room and grabbed his hand with both of hers. The reaction was immediate, and even more intense than before. Light exploded through her body, but this time it seemed painful rather than euphoric. She cried out, a sound that shattered several crystal decorations around the room, but she didn't let go. When the contact finally ended, Nalthira collapsed to her knees, gasping. The new light patterns in her skin had spread further up her arm, creating intricate designs that pulsed with their own rhythm. She looked up at Taimin with eyes that blazed with an intensity that bordered on madness. "Tomorrow," she whispered. "Same time. Don't make me wait." Over the following days, the situation grew worse. Princess Nalthira abandoned her royal duties entirely, spending her time in her chambers staring at the patterns of light that now covered nearly half her body. She refused to see anyone except Taimin, demanding longer and more frequent contact sessions. Each touch seemed to feed her addiction, while simultaneously making her withdrawal symptoms more severe. The Velthari High Council finally intervened on the 5th day. Elder Velthanor, ancient even by crystalline standards, confronted Taimin in the corridors outside the princess's chambers. "Human," the elder said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries, "what you and our princess are doing violates every natural law our species has discovered. She is becoming something that is no longer purely Velthari. The contamination spreads through her body like a virus, changing her very essence." Taimin felt a chill run down his spine. "Contamination? Is she in danger?" "We all are," Velthanor replied gravely. "If this continues, she may lose herself entirely, and if the change proves irreversible, we may have no choice but to exile her from our world forever." Dr. Kim So-young had always been fascinated by alien biology, but nothing in her 20 years of research had prepared her for what she was witnessing on Velthara. She arrived on the second transport ship, called in urgently, when Ambassador Taimin's reports described Princess Nalthira's strange reactions to human contact. So-young set up her laboratory in a crystal chamber adjacent to the diplomatic quarters, her equipment looking strangely out of place among the musical walls and glowing surfaces. She had brought her most sensitive bioelectric scanners, devices that could detect the faintest neural activity in any known species. What they revealed about the princess's condition left her stunned. "This is impossible," she muttered to herself, studying the readouts for the 100th time. The data showed that Nalthira's crystalline nervous system was restructuring itself at the molecular level. New neural pathways were forming, creating connections that had never existed in Velthari biology before. Taimin joined her in the lab after another exhausting session with the increasingly desperate princess. His own bioelectric readings were equally puzzling. "Doctor, something is happening to me too. After each contact I feel different, stronger somehow, but also more aware of things I can't quite explain." So-young nodded, pointing to her screens. "Your neural activity has increased by 30% since you've been here. Your brain is processing information faster, making connections between thoughts that normally wouldn't link together. It's as if the princess's crystalline neural network is somehow enhancing your own. But how is that possible? We're completely different species." Before So-young could answer, Kilvan entered the laboratory, accompanied by an elderly Velthari, whose light patterns were so dim they were barely visible. The old alien moved with the careful steps of someone who had lived for centuries, and his crystalline skin showed the weathered clarity of extreme age. "Dr. Kim," Kilvan said formally, "may I introduce Scholar Thylanos, keeper of our most ancient records. He has information that may be relevant to your research." The old scholar's voice was like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, soft but clear. "I have spent the last several days searching through texts that have not been read for over 1,000 years. What I found disturbs me greatly, but it may explain what is happening to our princess." He produced a crystalline tablet covered in intricate symbols that seemed to shift and move in the light. "This is from the era of the Great Silence, when our people first achieved space travel. Our ancestors wrote of visitors they called the Energy Bringers, beings whose life force was so chaotic and powerful that it could awaken dormant abilities. In our species," So-young leaned forward, her scientific curiosity overriding her caution. "What kind of abilities?" "The texts speak of Velthari, who could think faster, feel deeper, and perceive realities beyond normal sensation. But the process was dangerous. Many who encountered the energy bringers were changed so completely that they could no longer live among regular Velthari. They became something new, something unprecedented. Taemin felt his heart racing. "Are you saying that humans are these energy bringers from your legends?" Thylanos's light patterns flickered, with what might have been excitement or fear. The descriptions match remarkably well. Bipedal creatures with chaotic bioelectric fields, capable of forming neural links with our species that transcend normal biological boundaries. So Young was frantically taking notes, her mind racing through the implications. If this is true, then what's happening to the princess isn't contamination at all. It's evolution. Her body is trying to adapt to process human bioelectric energy, but it's happening too fast for her system to handle safely. "There's more," Thylanos continued, his ancient voice growing even softer. "The texts mention that successful integration required careful preparation and gradual exposure. Those who attempted direct contact without proper conditioning often experienced what the writings describe as neural storms, periods of intense craving, followed by dangerous instability." The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. So Young looked at her readouts with new understanding. Princess Nalthyra is essentially going through withdrawal because her nervous system has become dependent on human bioelectric input. But if we could find a way to regulate the exposure, to help her body adapt gradually, she could become the first of a new kind of being, Taemin finished, the implications hitting him like a physical blow. Part Velthari, part human, but something entirely new. The transport ship's engines hummed as Ambassador Lee Taemin pressed his face against the small window. Below him stretched a world unlike anything he had ever seen. Velthara looked like someone had shattered a massive diamond and scattered the pieces across an entire planet. Crystalline spires reached toward twin purple suns, casting rainbow reflections that danced across the surface like liquid light. Taemin adjusted his diplomatic uniform one last time. 3 months of preparation had led to this moment. Earth desperately needed the rare minerals that Velthara could provide, and the Velthari needed Earth's agricultural technology to feed their growing population. It should have been a simple trade negotiation, but nothing about first contact with an alien species was ever simple. The landing pad was made of the same crystal material as everything else on this world. As Taemin stepped off his ship, he felt the surface vibrate slightly under his boots. The air smelled clean, almost sterile, with a faint metallic tang that made his nose tingle. His breath formed small clouds in the cool atmosphere, and he was grateful for the environmental suit. That kept him comfortable. A group of Velthari waited for him at the edge of the landing pad. Taemin had studied their physiology extensively, but seeing them in person still took his breath away. They looked like living sculptures carved from precious stones. Their bodies were translucent, with veins of colored light running beneath their crystalline skin. When they moved, soft chimes echoed through the air as their joints created musical notes. The lead diplomat, someone named Kilvan, according to his briefing materials, approached slowly. The Velthari extended one crystalline hand, and Taemin knew from his training that he should not make direct contact. The aliens communicated through bioelectric fields, and human touch could be overwhelming for them. Instead, he held up his own hand a few inches away, allowing their energy fields to interact safely. But before Kilvan could complete the formal greeting, another figure pushed through the group of diplomats. This Velthari was different from the others. Where they appeared smooth and uniform, she had intricate patterns carved into her crystalline form. Bands of gold and silver light pulsed through her body in complex rhythms. Even someone unfamiliar with Velthari culture could tell. She held high rank. "You are the human ambassador," she said, her voice creating harmonious tones that resonated in Taemin's chest. "I am Princess Nalthyra, heir to the crystal throne of Velthara." Taemin bowed respectfully. "Your Highness, I am honored to meet you. I am Ambassador Lee Taemin, representing Earth and humanity." The princess studied him with eyes that shifted from deep blue to bright green as the light hit them. Behind her, the other Velthari began making agitated, chiming sounds. Kylvan stepped forward, clearly concerned about something. "Princess, perhaps we should proceed with the traditional greeting protocols," the diplomat suggested carefully. Nalthira ignored him completely. She continued staring at Taimin with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. There was something hungry in her gaze, something that reminded him of a scientist examining a fascinating new specimen. "No," she said firmly, her crystalline features hardening with determination. "I want to touch the human directly." The reaction from her courtiers was immediate and shocking. The musical chimes turned discordant, creating an almost painful cacophony. Several of the Velthari actually stepped backward, their light patterns flickering with what Taimin could only interpret as fear or disgust. Kylvan's voice became urgent. "Your Highness, direct physical contact with aliens is forbidden by ancient law. It could be dangerous for both species." But Princess Nalthira had already taken a step toward Taimin, her crystalline hand reaching out toward him. The ambassador found himself caught between diplomatic necessity and growing alarm. This was definitely not covered in his training. Manual. Taimin hesitated as Princess Nalthira's crystalline hand moved closer to his. Every instinct told him to step back, to follow protocol, to listen to the increasingly frantic chiming sounds coming from the Velthari diplomats behind her. But something in her eyes stopped him. There was a desperation there, a need that transcended species barriers. "Your Highness," he said quietly, "are you certain about this? Your advisors seem very concerned." Nalthira's light patterns pulsed faster, creating swirling galaxies of color beneath her translucent skin. "I have spent my entire life following protocols, Ambassador. I have never questioned the ancient ways, but looking at you now I feel something I cannot explain, something that calls to the very core of my being." Kylvan made one last desperate attempt to intervene. "Princess, the bioelectric incompatibility could cause permanent damage to your neural matrix. The risks are too great." "Then I will bear those risks," she replied, never taking her eyes off Taimin. "Human, will you trust me as I am trusting you?" Taimin looked around at the assembled Velthari. Their crystalline faces showed expressions. He was learning to read fear, curiosity, and something that might have been excitement. This moment would either start a new chapter in human-alien relations or end his diplomatic career in spectacular failure. "If this is what you truly want, Your Highness, then yes." He slowly raised his bare hand toward hers. The moment their skin made contact, everything changed. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Nalthira's entire body lit up like a supernova, brilliant light racing through her crystalline form, in patterns too complex and fast for the eye to follow. The musical chimes that normally accompanied Velthari movement exploded into a symphony of sounds that ranged from barely audible whispers to notes so high they made Taimin's ears ring. But it was the princess herself who showed the most dramatic reaction. Her eyes, which had been shifting between blue and green, now blazed with white-hot light. Her mouth opened in what might have been surprise or ecstasy, and a sound emerged that was unlike any Velthari communication Taimin had ever heard. It was raw, primal, almost organic in its intensity. The human ambassador felt the shock too. A tingling sensation shot up his arm and spread through his entire nervous system. It was like touching a live wire, but instead of pain, he felt an odd sense of completion, as if a circuit had been closed that he hadn't even known was open. His vision sharpened. Colors became more vivid, and for just a moment he could swear he heard thoughts that weren't his own. The contact lasted only seconds, but those seconds felt like hours. When Nalthira finally pulled her hand away, both beings staggered backward. The princess's light patterns were chaotic now, pulsing in random bursts that made her look like a malfunctioning neon sign. Taimin's hand tingled with residual energy, and he could still feel phantom sensations racing up and down his arm. The courtyard fell silent, except for the princess's heavy breathing. The other Velthari stared in stunned amazement. Some of their light patterns had dimmed to almost nothing, while others blazed brighter than before, as if they had somehow been affected by proximity to the contact. Nalthira looked down at her own hand in wonder. Where she had touched Taimin, Her crystalline skin now showed new patterns of light, swirling designs that seemed to move independently of her other neural activity. She flexed her fingers experimentally, and the new patterns responded, creating cascades of color that had never existed in Velthari physiology before. "What have we done?" Kelvin whispered, his voice barely audible. The princess raised her head to look at Taimin, and the ambassador saw something in her expression that made his blood run cold. It wasn't satisfaction or curiosity anymore. It was hunger. Pure, desperate. Hunger for something she had just discovered existed, but could barely understand.